This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is March 6th, 2025.
I'm Scott Lundebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. I just finished an hour-and-a-half board meeting, and I had another meeting that was relatively heavy earlier today. And so I just am mentally checked out in some ways, but I'm sure we'll still do a great show. This is a fantastic way to start the episode.
If you set the bar low, you can only overcome it.
Yeah, kind of like trade with the US, which is one of the things we'll be talking about today, as well as the BC budget, which it happened, apparently, and everyone's already forgotten about it.
Yes, the government will be funded for another year, but there's not much else more to talk about. But nevertheless, we will dive into the one or two things in there.
Patreon.com/politicos. Let's just jump right in. So you're David Eby, you just won a majority government by the skin of your teeth, and you didn't promise a lot in the election. The world seems to be turned upside down, and you have to propose a budget. And what do? I guess the answer is stay the course almost perfectly.
I mean, I don't envy the people in the Ministry of Finance who have to put together a budget with just the massive uncertainty on the horizon on how that's all going to go. Just figuring out what your left and right of arc is on that is going to be one hell of a headache. So I kind of get we're not going to shoot for the moon or throw crazy stuff at it. Nevertheless, this is clearly a time of great uncertainty. That means big things have to, well, not just great uncertainty, but time of change, big changes in the world. And that also means BC has to move to do big things. And that is just not here. If you were looking for the budget to basically arbor up BC against the buffeting trade winds and everything else, this is not the budget for that.
Yeah, it avoids what I think is a trap of, going austerity before we know what things are doing, right? So there's no cuts in it. There's no big tax increases. There is new spending. I'll be clear on that. There's money for healthcare, most notably $a few billion, $4 billion over 3 years.
The debt to GDP ratio goes up by 50% over this. From taking the 2024 forecast and looking at their plan it jumps from 22.9 to 34.4. So that's a big jump.
Yeah, and that one's particularly interesting because the deficit roughly stays the same of about 10 billion over 3 years. So I guess the GDP is shrinking.
Well, according to their forecast, their average forecast that they're using on this has a 0.3% growth. So, barely scraping above the recession levels on that. So it's not even that they're forecasting giant recession. There's just more spending than the revenue can support.
Oh, it's the deficit grows, right? That's why the debt to GDP grows. Is the deficit stays the same, but we keep taking out more money, so the deficit has grown, or the debt has grown from 133 billion to 208 billion over this.
Because debt would be the sum of all the deficits.
A lot of that debt growth is the capital spending, and capital spending is still a big part of this budget. So the deficit on the operating side is 10 billion a year, but then we're looking at 20 billion of capital spending annually. And, you got to pay for that, and we're paying for that with debt. But at least capital spending invests in the province in a way that we have assets. So there's still value to this, but...
Yeah, although I think you can sometimes get into the thing where you just assume any investment is positive ROI, to kind of hand wave concerns about the debt away on that, because it in the capital budget, and it's not always the case on that, though sometimes it's hard to quantify on some of the government initiatives on that.
Yeah, building hospitals and schools is definitely a good thing, but they don't necessarily pay for themselves as obviously or as quickly. But having a sick, uneducated population does harm your...
Yeah, well, I mean, you can... there's like a dollar value assigned to like a quality adjusted life here, so you could probably actually figure out the health one without too much challenge.
So also sitting in the budget here is a $4 billion contingency per year. So if you're really scared about those $10 billion deficits, you can really look at them as $6 billion deficits that might grow to 10. I grew up in the Ralph Klein era where he would project a certain, fiscal balance at the end of the year. And, oh, look, oil prices overshot our projections by 2 or 3 times. And suddenly we have this massive surplus that we weren't expecting. And that definitely happens. That definitely happens with resource royalties on occasion, but when it happens so consistently, everyone started to get a little suspicious, and packing in a $4 billion contingency, which contingencies are valuable when, we look back even before the uncertainty now, and wildfires would eat it up quickly. Maybe not 4 billion, but, they have earmarked that contingencies can be used for unplanned or unannounced initiatives, which is usually what you put in a budget, but here we are.
Yeah, having a big contingency just makes a lot of sense right about now, because you will have to do a bunch of spending, or revenue might take a bigger hit than anticipated. We actually do end up in a recession, so that all makes sense. What is interesting, though, is there just isn't a whole lot new in there, either on the capital side or the operations side. They're throwing a bunch of money at the healthcare, and that's kind of the biggest single ticket item. But if you were looking for this is the tariff response budget, there is not a lot there, despite that getting pretty high billing in how the government talked about it. The actual building a stronger economy section has 3 line items on its budget table, $172 million over 3 years on all of them, and it's stuff like bridge maintenance, maintaining BC Transit services, and an integrated marketplace initiative. That last one's really the only one that isn't just keep things working on there, and 30 million over 3 years is not the sort of thing that's going to keep BC out of economic trouble.
And notably in the maintaining bridges, transit investments are included in here. And for the last few months, we've been hearing from TransLink about how they are facing massive shortfalls in their budget that they need plugged at some point if they don't come up with new revenue streams. And so the provincial government kind of went, no, we'll just keep you at what you're at. There's a little bit of money for BC Transit, 47 million over 3 years. Which is not much.
That's, it's in the year. It's a couple extra bus routes or whatnot, or covering off the cost of unexpected inflation in handling that sector. So it's, I don't know, just all kind of a little disappointed. I mean, the thing I was particularly looking for here was, one or two big things that was this is what we are doing to make sure BC has a stronger economy that actually withstand everything that is going on, and there's just none of that to actually be seen here.
You don't think increasing the film credit initiative for BC made movies from 35 to 40% is going to do that?
It might help a little. Yeah, we may steal 1 or 2 movies away from Georgia or whatever, but that's not going to be the thing that keeps the province going, or
Yeah.
prevents it from hitting a giant recession if the tariffs come back around in a month.
Yeah. Like having some vision in here would have been nice at all. On education, there's another 370 million over 3 years. There's another 1.6 billion over 3 years for income and disability supports, which will definitely help those at the very bottom of our social economic ladders. 500 million for addiction treatment and recovery programs, which includes their involuntary treatment facilities that they're talking about. Secure care, I think they're branding it. Um, but it doesn't even sound like a lot of it is new. It's vague on that section. BC
Reducing,
Builds is getting another 318 million over
yeah,
three
that's
years.
bundled in the reducing cost for family section, which the single biggest item in there is just a ICBC rebate. That's going to cost 410 million this year.
$110 back to every driver. EB did pass a law a couple of years ago requiring all ICBC and hydro surpluses to just get paid back rather than done anything else with. Like, there's an issue, I guess, if the province continually raids profitable crown corporations to cover up fiscal issues, but paying checks back every year also doesn't feel like the best option.
No, but it means you get to announce something every year.
Yeah.
So politicians love that.
And then about $300 million split between homeless encampment programs and justice and policing all over 3 years. So just little bits of money here and there. The health stuff and the income disability supports are probably the biggest investments, and ones I'm happy to see, but nothing that really says how we are going to build our economy forward in a way that, if it has to be, is less dependent on the US. Like, where's a big subsidy if you wanted to do it this way for businesses that will struggle? Where's a big subsidy for people directly? Or where is investments in paper, upgrading sawmills and rebuilding paper manufacturing and bringing back industries that have been offshored because of free trade that doesn't exist anymore, right? Those are all the different kind of options.
Oh hell, you could even just kill two birds with one stone on it by just going big on housing on there, and then using that to help soak up some of the excess supply on the softwood lumber side, which is being hit with double tariffs.
Yep.
There's just a whole lot more you could be doing. And a couple of weeks back, when we lead up to this, I was kind of kicking back and forth, kind of what the two options on: would they sprinkle out like little bits of goodies for everyone, or would they pick one or two like huge big catch everyone's attention headline thing and focus the budget on that? It seems like they went with the number of that second one, but the scale of the first one. And yeah, it is just the most stay the course possible budget, which just seems out of step with where things are right now.
It's also wild that, if you think about it, we had the election in October. Legislature didn't meet in the fall. And so we've just been waiting 6 months for this. Like, the legislature rose in June, and they had all this time to think about what would they do with a new majority government. And what they came up with is like 2% more. So that's cool. It could have been worse, I guess.
I mean, we're adding 50% to the debt over the next 3 year, or the debt to GDP ratio over the next 3 years. Surely we could actually get a little more for what we're spending on that.
Well, this thankfully isn't all the provinces looking at doing in response to the US. The premier awkwardly had to give an announcement from the budget lockup about the tariffs because they were happening at the same time. And that was able to be reported, but the budget wasn't. And so reporters were confused, but they managed to they did their jobs very well. Good job, reporters. We got the news about what the tariff response in BC is, and we got a little bit more today because the situation's just in flux. Every day is a new series of announcements and walkbacks, and then it's the Trump presidency on steroids. It's awful. So what BC has announced is that we are going to have a special tariff response bill in the coming days in the legislature. So we'll probably be talking about that next week. It's a little bit vague about what's going to be on this, but it's going to allow the province to defend BC jobs and businesses and respond swiftly and nimbly to emerging challenges. Some of the things we've been hinted at is allowing the ability to remove interprovincial trade barriers, mandating low carbon fuels added to gasoline and diesel be produced in Canada. That's something they've already announced, and now they'll have the legislation for. And they will allow BC to toll commercial vehicles that are driving from Washington to Alaska through our province, which I gather is not many, but is a thing. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of the Alaskan population centers are not super well connected by roadways. A lot of that does go by ship or air. That said, I'm not sure this is necessarily a can of worms we want to be opening on through traffic, considering that in many times it's cheaper or quicker to drive through the US to get from Western Canada to Central and Eastern Canada. So introducing this as a potential area might not be super great for us, particularly because we don't have, the best east-west infrastructure going.
That's just because no one lives in Northern Ontario for big stretches of Highway 1 there. There are people in Northern Ontario, obviously, but there's big stretches of that highway that I've heard are.
I've driven it. It is a long couple days. It's worse than just going across the prairies, by far. The road to Tofino is like a slightly less windy version of that for 4 days.
I thought you were going to say the better answer here is to just toll all traffic through BC, and that'll hit those commercial vehicles.
I mean, that would also be doing help with congestion, but both points are valid on that one.
Yeah, so this follows some of the other things BC has done, like removing red state liquor from the shelves, working to diversify markets, and just a lot of other vague sounding stuff like strengthening our economy by expediting projects, but TBD when those get fast tracked. So
yeah, and like the feds are doing some stuff on interprovincial trade. But, Nova Scotia's introduced a bill that's basically if we'll just take other provinces, professional accreditations, regulatory stuff, etc., as long as they do the same for us, which is great. Like, we should be doing that. And it's kind of weird we haven't jumped on that one. Yeah, so far Ontario has joined in on that. Would be nice for BC to do that as well.
We'll have to see what's in this bill when it comes to the legislature. I suspect Cabinet is currently hashing it out and doesn't even know what they want to put into it. So maybe it will, but they probably also get an earful from all the regulatory colleges, which is the big pushback on all of this. Interestingly, you mentioned that Nova Scotia bill. There were 2 private members' bills introduced from BC Conservative members this week. John Rustad introduced the Free Trade and Mobility Within Canada Act, which I believe is just the carbon copy or the cut and paste version of the Nova Scotia bill for BC, and lets him hammer the government for the same reason. Which, fair enough, that's good use of opposition time. I have no problem with that. And
it's actually good. It's a good bill. They should go through with it.
And similarly, interestingly, is MLA Judy Tour, who drew criticism during the election campaign for being a, quote, quack, according to science advocate Joe Schwartz. and for calling herself a doctor when she wasn't, introduced the Perinatal and Postnatal Mental Health Strategy Act, which basically directs the government to develop a plan to provide universal mental health coverage for before and after people give birth, and have a strategy around that. Which, cool. I mean, that's a real issue, having had kids and seen what people who give birth, or like this even covers people who experience miscarriage, termination, stillbirth, or death of an infant. Like, yeah, our society should support these people, and having a plan to do that, this is a good bill. I mean, it's one of those things that it's like, it's make a plan to make a plan to solve something, but at least it highlights a good issue that's worth talking about.
Require the government to make a plan to make a plan.
Yeah. For the things the BC Conservatives could be bringing forward, I am more in support of these two than many of the other things. Which brings us to their AGM this past weekend, which sounds like it was a hoot. 800 people descended on Nanaimo. There's some coverage from CBC. Andrew McLeod in the Tyee actually had a pretty good report on it, describing it as rowdy, but Rustad was ultimately the victor of it. The big thing that I was kind of watching was like, how does the board of directors vote go? Because there was no single capacity in that meeting to eject John Rustad if members were mad. Rather, they could have probably used some arcane procedural rules, because there was a constitution up for vote, and that did get amended on the floor in some reasonable ways. It sounds like they're going to keep their AGMs every other year, and they are going to have 2-year terms when someone had talked about doing 4-year terms for the AGMs. Boring procedural stuff. But most importantly, the people running for the board was the slate endorsed by John Rustad, and they won over some of the even more reactionary people who were out there wanting to go full Trump. Not to say that the people siding with Rustad were the moderates either.
But yeah, either way, his position's secure for now, at least from that potential line of attack. There's still caucus turmoil to deal with, but as far as whether or not there's going to be big movements among the party membership, not going to happen, at least for now.
Yeah, not at least until the leadership convention, when he has to, face his membership. And I forget exactly when that is. I think it's 6 months or a year. So he's good for a little while. The AGM also did pass a number of resolutions. They voted to repeal SOGI 123 and get that out of schools. That's not surprising. There was a pledge to fire Bonnie Henry again, I believe. There was a promise to never become the BC Liberals 2.0.
That was by the returning party president on that one. Not exactly something you can actually enforce into any sort of constitutional bylaw. We'll just have to see what the political winds push them.
Yeah, so the BC Conservatives are exactly the party you probably thought they were before this. And yeah, it's largely the same people in power. Some Conservatives didn't have as good of a week, notably, like many of the BC Conservatives, former BC Liberal Mike DeYoung was hoping to run for the federal Conservatives in Abbotsford until this week. He was told by the party, "We don't want you. You don't get the green light."
Yeah, I think we talked about it when he first announced almost a year ago now that he was seeking the nomination. Seems like an obvious step for him, well aligned. as finance minister, he had quite the reputation as being a real fiscal hawk and making sure every single penny had to be justified before going out. So, the sort of thing you could actually see just sliding in quite well into the federal Conservative Party. Nevertheless, apparently got a 3-sentence message that basically said, Conservative Party didn't think he was qualified to be an MP, which is wild for someone who's been in politics for, 30 years, held multiple senior government portfolios in the third largest province in the country, former finance minister. Just wild.
And no, there was never an obvious scandal behind him. He would hold the baggage of the BC Liberals, and for better and worse, but the biggest story about Mike DeYoung for a while was that he didn't use email because he's a farmer. But it's very weird.
Yeah, so there's, as far as I can tell, there's basically maybe 3 possible explanations. One of them is just one of the other candidates just had the ear, became the party favorite, and there was some backroom shenanigans basically swing the nomination to them. It's always a possibility with nomination races. It's a bit of a wild west when it comes to elections. Then there's maybe all their vetting turned up something that 30 years of BC Liberal and 30 years of BC Liberal vetting and 30 years of NDP Oppo research missed. Seems unlikely, or there's, for some reason, the Conservative Party's decided right now, as they're sliding in the polls, they just need to shrink that tent even smaller. None of them seem like a great explanation for why you turned down his nomination, except maybe the highly implausible one that the vetting turned up something that was missed for 30 years.
He was secretly a foreign agent. He's not the only candidate who was rejected. A week or so ago, Anita Huberman, the former Surrey Board of Trade CEO, was seeking the Conservative nomination in Surrey Centre and was also rejected as well. They said she was 3 weeks short of the deadline for having 6 full months of membership, which I guess is one of those, you shouldn't. But I feel like they bend the rules sometimes.
Yeah, it's probably one. Sorry. I don't have enough insight on that, but it's generally one of those things that the party really wants you. They'll make it work for you.
Maybe they wouldn't bend the rules, but they would move the nomination date 3 weeks later, so suddenly she's qualified.
Mm-hmm.
That's a way to make it work. But so interesting that otherwise prominent people who would fit the mold are getting rejected in BC from the federal Conservatives. We might be in an election starting next week when Mark Carney wins in 3 days and
potentially calls an election right away or within the next week or so.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk federal politics then. The first obvious story is the tariffs, which will probably be different by the time you're listening to this. As of now, there is a 25% tariff on Canadian goods that are not subject to the USMCA, which is apparently 60% of our goods that go to the US, something like that. And Canada has retaliated with an initial round of tariffs, but has not planned to, or has paused our plan to increase them in 3 weeks based on the US, the US
backing down or pausing. The whole thing's so
recognizing their own free trade agreement.
Yes. Trump's own free trade agreement, too.
Similar situation for Mexico. Although, once again, Mexico wins by getting the announcement first, as far as I read it from social media.
Yeah, they theirs came out a day, 12 hours, something like that before. So good on them. Yeah. Also, I think part of it is a bunch of middle of the country Republicans like, holy shit, if we tariff potash at 25%, all of the farmers who are my constituents will go bankrupt. maybe we should rethink this one.
It's incredible the amount of damage you can do when you don't understand how your country works.
Yeah, also completely would have wrecked the auto sector because, parts, well, you wouldn't just be a case of you get 25% on a car. Parts would be, go across the border multiple times. The whole thing is basically entirely integrated. So it would have just absolutely wrecked it because you would get, 25% tariff on top of 25% tariff on top of 25% tariff on like a bunch of stuff that are just the inputs into the car, even before the final one potentially crosses the border if it's not, final assembly in the States. So, Judd, I don't know. We'll see if this comes back around. What happens in another month?
Yeah. There was also the weird report of Trump and Trudeau on the phone where Trump was
like profanity.
Yeah, was swearing at him repeatedly.
And apparently this happened over dairy of all things, which is just the most on point thing.
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah. Man. How does the few thousand dairy farmers get to basically dictate Canadian foreign policy?
It's
insane.
So what's funny though to me is Trump can complain about our supply management approach all he wants, but it's not like the US doesn't do things to support its dairy industry. It just does them in a more ham-fisted direct subsidy way.
Which does result, which is more progressive than we're going to increase the cost of staple goods for everyone.
I don't know. Our eggs are cheaper now. It seems to be working now.
Yeah, I think that more has to do with like which flocks have caught the most bird flu than
we don't have bird flu because our farms are smaller and not industrialized. In part because of supply management. It's a complicated system, but it's working. Yeah. Finally. It's all very...
I mean, Mexico also doesn't have supply management. Their eggs are quite a bit cheaper. In fact, the U.S. Border Patrol has been seizing a whole bunch of eggs recently coming across from Mexico.
One thing they haven't been seizing is fentanyl from Canada, as the latest numbers have shown that when our new efforts to clamp down on the almost non-existent supply have managed to reduce it from like a few dozen pounds or kilos to like under one. So good work on that $1 billion spent. It does seem to be making some effect. Value per dollar is debatable, but like you say, everything's kind of delayed again until April, but we're in a very weird situation where some stuff is tariffed. It sounds like aluminum and steel tariffs are also coming in next week. I don't know. Everything is up in the air, which is also encouraging.
I think softwood lumber gets bundled in with those as well.
Of course it does. It is encouraging our governments to work faster on things like internal trade barriers. There was a big announcement from the Committee on Internal Trade this past week that's involved in the Canada Free Trade Agreement. An
agreement which, by the way, was signed in 2017. How's that internal free trade coming?
It's going faster now.
Slightly, yeah. I mean, it's also ridiculous that we even needed to sign that because that's what Confederation was supposed to be. Like, serious countries don't need to sign internal free trade agreements because they are just a free trade zone.
The new announcement is that by June 1st, all of the provinces will be required to have a process of recognizing labor credentials from other provinces. This goes back to what you were talking about with Nova Scotia and Ontario having already moved ahead on this. And so I guess in the next couple months, we'll see the remaining provinces start to create plans to get there. There's also plans to get us to have standardized consumer good regulations, with the exception of food, across the country. Isn't food regulated by the federal government, though?
I think largely it is, because you have the was it Canada Agricultural Inspection Agency and the
Yeah.
Canada Food Inspection Agency. And
Yeah. It's such a mess.
I know packaging is regulated federally because it has to be bilingual, and unilingual provinces wouldn't care if it wasn't mandated by the feds.
Is packaging bilingual in Quebec? I haven't been there in a while. They might
been a while.
They might regulate it themselves. That's part of how Canada is very weird.
It's been a while since I've bought anything in Quebec, being quite a few years now since I was there, but I'm pretty sure everything there was bilingual. You might have, a lot of them have, swapped what the first language you see is and which one's the big print versus the small print, but I'm pretty sure it's bilingual there too.
And the federal government and all provinces, with the exception of PEI and Newfoundland and Labrador, have agreed to remove the barriers to alcohol sales. So we're hoping to see direct-to-consumer sales in some jurisdictions within weeks. The wine war between Alberta and BC won't get to happen again, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, this is all good. It's silly that it's taken us this long. It's silly that it was necessary in the first place, but, great. It's also the thing that gets pretty high billing whenever someone talks about what should we do to make the economy more resilient in the face of a U.S. government that is wildly flying off in all directions when it comes to trade. It's definitely helpful from that, but it's also not going to be the thing that replaces the U.S. market for Canada. And I don't know, it'd be good to see a few more ideas kicked around beyond just lowering trade barriers, even though I'm very much for it.
Tell that to Pierre Poilievre, because I do remember his long video of who should be our secret next big trading partner? Ourselves. Oh yeah. I agree.
Well, it's not just him.
Oh yeah, no.
Andrew Coyne, Mark Carney, it's everyone's first or second go-to thing. Not saying it's not important. Would be nice if we had a few other things on that list.
Well, I keep seeing these references to reports being this will, create hundreds of $billions worth of trade or, have that kind of effect. But I look at the things we talk about when we talk about internal trade barriers, like labor credentials, food regulations, liquor sales. I agree with you here. Let's simplify these all where we keep, good standards of health, safety, and labor protections and environmental protections. But nothing that I've seen suggested so far is that's why Canada doesn't work, is because this barrier exists. It's just a bunch of little things that are annoying and probably make things a little more expensive than they need to be. But maybe you add all the little things up and it is a big number, but I'm skeptical of that. So, yeah, cool. We're finally doing things. I think it gets a lot of attention when there are other things we need to be doing and solving more substantively, but it's not a bad thing to do in many ways. Related to things to do is, trying to build up our social programs, I guess. There's been a couple announcements as Trudeau is in his final days of his prime ministership, assuming he doesn't renege and come back as savior like his father before him.
Or, that was one of the things Trump was accusing him of today, was that apparently this whole resisting the tariff thing is just because Trudeau was trying to win re-election.
Was he saying it more about Trudeau or the Liberals?
I think it was Trudeau.
Yeah.
I don't think he has enough nuance in his understanding of Canadian politics to separate the two.
No, I don't think so either. But he may not even realize there's a leadership race happening. He may have been
Going
told
to
it
be
and then forgot
shot.
it.
Yeah, going to be shot in like 3 days when Mark Carney gives him a call.
Yeah. Oh, poor Mark. So what Trudeau did get to announce was childcare deals with 11 provinces and territories, notably Alberta and Saskatchewan not on the list. He's also announced a couple pharmacare deals. I think he had the first pharmacare deal with Manitoba earlier this week or last week, and one with BC today, potentially. Kind of fulfilling that coverage, that money to cover contraceptives and diabetes medications. And in both of these provinces where it's already been announced, they're going to cover a couple other meds in addition. So those are positive. The childcare announcement, $37 billion over a few years to basically guarantee the systems that have been set up will continue. It's my suspicion is Alberta and Saskatchewan were holding out so that they can prioritize private partners or do it in a slightly different way. But it's good news for most of the provinces. Notably, it reminds me of in 2017 when John Horgan ran on $10 a day daycare in BC within 10 years. And we're 2 years out from that, and they have just stopped promising $10 a day daycare now. It's just more affordable childcare in BC, which is something they accomplished. It is definitely cheaper to send my kid to daycare now than it was when they were first born. But it's not 10 a day. It is for some, but not for me.
Yeah, cool. It does get slightly sketchy on the whole thing because it's not quite a caretaker convention we're in, but we are. I don't know. It's a quasi one with Parliament Perot, the Prime Minister on his way out. Like it feels at least like we ought to be in the spirit of that, even if we aren't legally. And dropping this, the high-speed rail announcement, and everything does all feel a little sketch.
I think so there was a Child Care Act that I think gave the kind of like the Pharmacare Act gave the government the ability to sign these deals. And we're not in an election period, so
I know we're not, but
as long as the subsequent Liberal leaders aren't opposed to them, right? If Mark Carney was like, I don't like childcare, that would create more issues than the fact I can't picture any of the leadership candidates reneging on these deals or even not wanting to do them.
Yeah, nevertheless, it does still kind of feel like the government ought to approach it in a quasi caretaker fashion. The period between when the PM announced he's resigning and when a new one's picked, especially when Parliament is also not in session for that.
Well, then they also shouldn't be announcing Arctic military hubs, which they also did this week.
Yeah, so Bill Blair came out and announced that Iqaluit, Inuvik, and Yellowknife are going to be the site of 3 planned northern military hubs. Not bases, mind you. Hubs. I believe Yellowknife already has a CF presence at it. But yeah, so these are operational support hubs, so they're going to have stuff like communications, transportation, infrastructure, and secure storage for supplies. So, a warehouse with an airstrip attached and a radio tower or two is kind of what you'd be thinking about this. And, it's fine. We do need more of a northern presence, but also if you're going to seriously look at the situation, say, Great Ken is now at the spot where it's probably going to have to not rely on the alliances it signed as much in terms of maintaining sovereignty. We're going to need a lot more than 3 logistics and communication hubs to get there, and we ought to be talking bases, not transport hubs on that.
My thoughts on this are these are the most obvious locations for them to go if you're not using Whitehorse, I guess. Like, you're not going to put it logistically in like Iqaluit's not a big, like Yellowknife is like 18,000 people. The
And Nuvit's even smaller than both of those.
Yeah, so we're talking small communities. Iqaluit's
3,000 people.
7,500, 3,000. So yeah, you got to put it somewhere where there is an existing capacity to build something, or else you're spending a lot more money. I think realistically, this is a first step in a longer plan to build it up, and one that's more attainable. By starting here, you can get something going in a couple years and then get a full base if that's the goal.
I love your optimism on a couple of years. We're currently like 15 plus years on building a refueling point at Nanisivik that was started under Harper, like early Harper on that. And it is still not operational. So, based on past performance, this isn't so much a 1 to 2 year start point. It's the next 2 decades.
That is true. It does say there is $2 billion over 20 years to establish hubs to increase our presence there.
Yeah, they ought to slash an order of magnitude off the timeline on that one if they're trying to get stuff going at the speed it should be. Which, I will point out, these 3 hubs, go to that, or the Nanisivik, longer than World War II to get those going. Although the 20 years in this case may be also like operational stuff, not just the build-up.
I choose to believe that.
I mean, I would hope so, but like I said, the history on this one's not good.
Well, and finally, as we mentioned, the Liberal leadership voting is happening as we speak. Hopefully people are getting through the barriers that have been put in place by the party to try to make sure people are humans who should be voting.
Yeah, at the start of this week, I saw that the Liberals had 100,000 people had gone through the process on that. Have you heard anything about updates on that number?
I haven't seen numbers. I haven't seen a lot of people struggling. Those stories seem to evaporate after the first few days. So hopefully the hiccups are being worked through.
I mean, there's a CBC piece from like 8 hours ago about the struggling on it.
Yeah, Karina Gould is apparently saying people need more time to vote.
Yeah. Okay. So, according to the CBC article, 137,000 have verified and 115 have cast votes. Keep in mind, there's more than 400,000 said they'd signed up, or that was the number the Liberal Party had said had signed up. So, we're looking at, a third at this point actually making it through. Potentially that's going to get a little higher as things roll around, but, not great as far as the process goes.
In any case, assuming Mark Carney gets picked, which is where I'd put my money, we could be surprised. Bet. I will say I listened to Frank Bayless on David Moskrop's podcast, and he's very interesting. He's a very interesting man with actual ideas for the country. Didn't agree with all of them, but was very interesting.
I feel like every leadership race needs one person that's kind of the policy want who's just like throwing out ideas. Is there maybe a little too all over the place to just be categorized as the want? But I don't know. I feel like it's a staple of leadership races, and there should be more. Those people should show up in all of them.
Absolutely. What I found interesting about Mark Carney in the last week is that he is renouncing his Irish and UK citizenship so that he will be purely Canadian and not a tri-citizen as Prime Minister. Now, there's no prohibition on holding 2 passports and being Prime Minister.
At least in Canada.
Yeah, in this country. Australia has it.
Yeah, which has led to hilarious scandals of members of Parliament being forced to resign because they're secretly Canadian. Because, theirs doesn't just apply to ministers or first ministers. It's any elected office, at least at the federal level.
Yeah. Carney has held Irish citizenship for decades. It's unclear how he got it because he was born in Canada. Maybe his parents were Irish.
Yeah, I think as long as your grandparents are Irish, you can apply for it.
And then he got his British citizenship in 2018, 5 years after he started as Bank of England governor. And now he thinks as prime minister he should only hold one citizenship, which it brings back funny stories because Tom Mulcair in the 2015 election, he started that one in first place. There were a couple polls where the NDP were leading in the summer of 2015, and he famously, I believe, held French citizenship as well, and some people tried to criticize him for that, and I don't think that's what sunk him. I think Stéphane Dion also held French citizenship.
I think he still does. But, there's so many other knots against Dion that I don't think anyone bothered going to the French thing.
And if you go back in Canadian history, most of our first prime ministers were Scottish or British.
Well, he was fairly late into the country's history before Canadian citizenship was really a thing and they weren't just British subjects.
So,
I think my grandmother was not, even though she was born in Canada, was born a British subject and not a Canadian citizen.
Oh, Andrew Scheer also has American citizenship too.
Oh yeah, that became a controversy during the
See, that would be an issue this year. But this is weird. I don't get why he's doing this. If he wants to, he can, but anyway, I wouldn't. And I wouldn't even advise him to do it. Because, yeah.
Yeah, I could kind of see the arguments from both ways, but yeah, I don't know. The Liberals kind of set the bar when they went after Scheer on it, so you kind of gotta hold to it, I guess. But, unlike those other ones, he's actually probably going to win his, at least the first vote after the citizenship thing came up. So I think all the rest of them kind of dropped it after they lost their respective elections. So, I don't know. We'll have to see on this one. And that has been Playtoast. Find links to everything we talked about at playtoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/playtoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Playtoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Thanks for listening.